Welcome to our Driven Podcast. I'm John Bryant, and certainly glad to have you listening in today. This podcast is a podcast for thinkers and leaders, and we just appreciate each one of you who are interested in growing and hearing some exciting stories. We're just glad you're here. Our guest today is Craig Duncan. Craig has already begun sharing with us. He's going to share some more about his ministry there at Lonoke Baptist Church. And as always, we have Nathan Rogers, our co-host, with us. And Nathan, it's good to see you today.
It's good to be back on, man. So Craig, we left off last podcast. We kind of got your story a little bit, got to know you some, and also what God's doing through you at Lonoke Baptist Church in Morrilton, Arkansas. And when we left off at the last podcast, we were talking about how spiritual growth really preceded numerical growth at Lonoke Church, and how you got to see that, how that manifested itself firsthand. And so I wanted to follow up in this next podcast and unpack that a little bit. I know it's easy for us to, as pastors, to understand that our church needs the spiritual growth first, and we can preach and we can communicate the vision. But how did you get your people to buy in? Or did you?
I was fixing to say, whenever I figure it out, I'm going to write a book about it. First thing is I had to believe it myself.
Right.
I grew up in church. I grew up in a fantastic Christian family. But to be honest, the church culture that I grew up in didn't have a spiritual growth to it. And so if I can be honest with my church life upbringing, was in church every day. Every time the doors were open, I was there. That's the world that I grew up in. But having the precedent set for me to see spiritual growth was something that I'm not going to say that I didn't believe in, but I had never seen it before. And so it had to be something first that I believed in, that I could actually herald the Word of God and it transform lives and hearts. I've heard the gospel and the word preached my whole life, but I've never seen it take hold of people. And so I had to take hold of it myself. And then I think, and this may be completely naive of me, but I think when the gospel is expounded the proper way, that people are addicted to it, that people want it. People crave that idea that they belong to something despite who they are. And when I started believing it, it just took a couple of examples of an individual hearing what I was able to say, seeing the life that I was able to live by the grace of God, and to see a life transformed. I think that my people saw it. And then when they saw it, they were able to believe it. And when the gospel, and this, I don't often know the right answers to questions like that, but the best way that I know how is that when you get a piece of something good, people can't help themselves. And so when you see a life change, when you see a heart given, when you see a marriage reconciled, when you see the people in town that are not thought of and they get their life right, that wakes people up, you might say. And when you wake them up, then it's time to go.
Sure.
And I think we spent a couple years waking myself up, waking my people up. And when we were up out of bed, then it was time to go to work.
So was it a kind of a slow awareness, or was there a moment that it all clicked, like an event or anything like that?
For me personally, yeah. Me being a arrogant 25-year-old, whenever they allowed me to pastor them, I decided that they needed a little praise and worship. That's what every young kid thinks church needs. And so growing up in a church with traditional music, and it goes beyond traditional music. It's your almost bluegrass type music.
Right.
You were there for several years, and And so introducing stuff like contemporary music is a foreign language. And we didn't have quite the talent for it. We didn't have the means for it, but I pushed ahead, I pushed ahead. And this was a story that I mentioned in the last podcast. I remember we were getting ready for a couple praise and worship songs, and I remember God saying, Craig, what are you doing, man? This is pointless. This is worthless. The only thing that matters is if your people worship. And I remember that. And I went home that day and I said, we're cutting all of this contemporary music out because we don't need it. We don't need it in order to do something good. For me, that was liberating to be able to take my hand off and to let God do something. And I think that my people recognized a sense of willingness with their young pastor to not have to have his way.
Sure.
And I think the people saw that, and there was a level of trust that was built in that moment. And so then when we move forward, there was a sense of, well, this guy really is our shepherd. He really does care about us. He doesn't care about himself. He doesn't care about his agenda. This guy just wants to lead us in a walk that is spiritual and that is more fruitful. And that event will always ring true in my life. It was the event that I believe started whatever you want to call is happening at our church. I'll always come back to that moment was a spiritual growth for me, and I think in essence it was a spiritual growth for my people as well. But
I can relate to being in churches with music that I didn't really enjoy,
Sure,
didn't
yeah.
really like. And
Yeah.
I think I've been guilty of pushing more of what I like.
yeah.
And, but
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're saying about dying to yourself and just
Sure,
seeing
yeah.
what the people
Yeah. Now
relate
there's some songs that we don't sing, like Precious Memories. Yeah, we scrap Precious Memories and stuff like that. But
You scrapped Precious
yeah,
Memories?
Hey, when it doesn't mention God, I have a hard time with it, bro. But we still live it in the context of where the people are at. But now, as we have grown, our culture has changed. Our context has changed a little bit. 6 years in, I would probably not define us a country church anymore.
Right.
We've got individuals from the city, even though Morrilton is not a big city. We have people from the city that come out and worship with us. And that's changed our culture, and that has been able to lead us down into some avenues that are not as traditional, but it was in God's timing.
Sure. And you guys, I mean, when I kind of define you as a rural church, it has more to do with geographic location than just because of where you guys are located. So your people bought in. We talked the last podcast about how, you guys, you grew. You had a moment when, the church just started kind of hopping level to level, which meant a move out of the sanctuary, move into the gym, move from the gym, finally into a new sanctuary that y'all have been dreaming about for several years. So today, where's Lonoke Baptist Church today?
Where are we today? Riding with Joey Cook on the way down here, he asked me that question, and I was honest enough to tell you I don't know. I don't know what the next step looks like. I haven't known what the next step looks like for 3 or 4 years. There's always these grand ideas of, we believe in the Great Commission and we believe in making disciples, but what does that mean? And there's soul searching that goes on. There's trying to figure it out. What does it mean to make disciples in Morrilton, Arkansas right now? I don't know. Obedience and faithfulness is what I just keep coming back to.
Sure.
Trying to continue to love God, His Word, His people, love the lost. Yeah, and I know that doesn't answer your question,
No, that's good.
but just to be honest, I don't always know what the next step is. I've had my seatbelt on for 3 years, taking the hits and enjoying the fast ride, and wherever he takes us next, I would like to think that we'd be faithful for it. And but where do we go from here? I don't know.
So as you started into that journey as that snotty-nosed contemporary kid,
Yeah.
you were doing it alone. You're not doing it alone anymore. You guys have added some staff. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, when I started pastoring at 25, I was the full-time youth pastor, and so I knew I would be able to hire a full-time youth pastor. But I knew no one was going to come work for a 25-year-old kid. There was no one in their right mind. And so I happened to find on the church ABA website all the way down in Crossett, Arkansas. Pastor Matt Griffith is with us now. He's been with me for 6 years, and we've been in this whole ride together. We were actually born on the same day. Real crazy story. And so we were both 25. It was my first pastorate, his first youth pastorate. We didn't have a clue what we were doing, but we did it together. And so that's been extremely fun. A couple years ago, we was able to be blessed with a children's pastor. And these are a couple positions that I recognize not a lot of rural churches are able to be blessed with these positions. But we were able to get a children's pastor that works from kindergarten to 5th grade, and he's fantastic, a previous kindergarten teacher, so he fits perfectly in there. And just a couple months ago, we added a community pastor, kind of a guy that every extension out of our church into the community is kind of what he focuses on. And Pastor Crenshaw has only been with us for a couple months, but he's got a good story and kind of grew up in our church. And so, yeah, we're a church of, we run 350 to 400, and we've got 4 individuals on staff, and they're all under 33.
Wow.
So it's an interesting dynamic. I don't know why our church lets us do it, but we just kind of go.
That's great.
Exciting. That sounds exciting.
But
You know what I love about your story, Craig, is is that it's organic. You know, I think that sometimes we get so caught up in reading all the books and hearing all the things that tell us that we have to have this vision and we have to have the plan, you know, established. And if we don't follow the plan, if we're not chasing the vision, if we're not good at visioneering, that we won't be successful. And I love to hear stories like you and other guys. It's like, man, we're just faithful to God and God's taking care of it. We don't necessarily know exactly what that vision is. We haven't written out the perfect plan and flow chart, but yet God's in the middle of it, and we're just chasing Him with everything we got. And
yeah, of course, we're good Baptist, and one of the things that we do, our I Heart Morrilton month, we stole from Chad Graves. I mean, that's what good Baptists do, is we, you know, take what works with someone else, and we try to
what's the
implement
famous Spurgeon quote? Is originality and a lack of plagiarism makes for dull preaching.
That's right.
That's one of my favorites. Yeah.
And so the things that we do, we sit down as a staff and we talk about things, and if we decide that something sounds good, you know, we always come back to context. How does it fit us? We love what Joey Cook is doing over in Conway, but you know, it's safe to say the things that he does might not fit our context the best. Definitely the things that we're doing might not fit his context the best. And that's what I try to harp on all the time, is that wherever God leads you, learn that place and be that place. I don't think that God leads us to change context. I think God leads us to live in a context and to flourish and prosper there. And that's what I think that we're doing a pretty good job of at Lonoke Baptist Church. And so it's fun. And I've always encouraged my people to remember that it's fun. Remember that this is a good time. We laugh in church. We have a good time in church. We try to keep it as least stale as possible. And I think people I think people want relationships, and they want a higher being to have power and to have presence in their life. And if we can help them understand that higher being is God, then I think that we've done our job good.
That's awesome. Awesome.
So,
now, Craig, you're also involved in academia a little bit right now. Am I not mistaken? Are you involved at the Missionary Baptist Seminary right now too?
yeah, I've been teaching there for about 3 years now. I've always been kind of addicted to learning, and got my bachelor's, master's, and even got my doctorate through there. But they asked me to do some teaching to continue just to be a part, and so I thought, well, I'm not in school right now, and so I'll use teaching as a way to continue learning.
Awesome.
And so it's been good. It's been good to always be in the books and just to, conversations around the table, things in my school studies that they always translate to church, and how I can better my ministry there at Lonoke Baptist Church. So,
What you teaching this semester?
I'm teaching evangelism, Genesis through Deuteronomy, and poetical books.
All right. So to any students listening out there, if you want to learn evangelism from Dr. Craig Duncan,
Careful with that.
get on down there in the Missionary Baptist Seminary and
That'll
learn.
get you in trouble, man.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
Well, Craig, you've said a lot of things that really have spoken to my heart, and I appreciate you sharing the story there at Lonoke. And I'm thinking about younger pastors who are listening to this, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I still make a lot of mistakes, in ministry. But the things that you've shared, I think, are going to be valuable to a lot of these young guys who are getting a good start, and wanting to progress.
yeah.
You've taught us a great lesson here
Well,
about contextualizing and making sure that the people and go with the people.
If we believe that God leads you to a place, then we've got to believe that God is going to be able to flourish you in that place.
Amen. That's good.
And so, and don't be afraid to own up to your mistakes. The quicker we own up to our mistakes, the faster we'll grow and be able to get about God's work.
Awesome.
So,
Well, Craig, again, thanks for being with us on the podcast, man. It's been a pleasure. And I've loved watching everything that God's done through you. Got to see Craig when he started his ministry. I remember being at your wedding.
Yeah,
man. Yeah, it was a good time.
What did we see? We went and watched a movie the night before or something.
We did. Had a great
It was a
time.
good time, man.
Yep. And now to see what God's doing through you is really
Yes, sir.
fun. So God bless you on your
Sir.
journey.
Thanks, guys.
You bet.
Great.
For John Bryan, I'm Nathan Rogers. This is the Driven Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.